The white man before him walked out with $40,000 in cash. No questions asked. He smiled. The teller smiled back. Not a word about compliance. No ID scan, no delay. Then came Leonard Vance, black, 55, neatly dressed in a button-down shirt, pressed khakis, and clean loafers. He placed his withdrawal slip on the counter, $25,000 from his personal account, along with 2 forms of ID. The teller didn't even glance at them. Her lips were tight, her voice sharper than necessary. "We can't process that for you, sir." Leonard blinked. "Excuse me?" "You'll need to wait outside while we contact risk and compliance," she said flatly, motioning toward the lobby with her chin. Large cash withdrawals like this can be suspicious. She hadn't looked at his ID. She hadn't touched her keyboard, but she'd already decided. He turned slightly, just in time to watch the white man from earlier disappearing through the glass doors, pocketing tens of thousands of dollars like it was nothing. Leonard didn't speak. They didn't know who he was, but they were about to find out. Have you ever seen someone humiliated just because they didn't look like they belonged? Tell us where you're watching from. The morning sun outside gleamed through the tall windows of the Eastlake Capitol branch in downtown Denver, casting streaks of gold onto the marble floors. It was a well-oiled, high-end banking machine. Modern, polished, efficient. Leonard had helped design it 18 years ago, back when he was still Undersecretary of the Treasury. Leonard Vance had advised on Eastlake's digital security framework, ethics compliance policies, and high-value transaction infrastructure. His signature was still in their system documentation, buried in the code, etched into the protocols. He never expected to be treated like royalty, but today, he expected to be treated like a customer. He had entered quietly. No bodyguards, no designer suit, no Rolex. Just a man with purpose. A man who came to withdraw money for a scholarship fund, supporting underprivileged students from his neighborhood in Aurora. He'd done this before, many times. But something felt off the moment he stepped up to the counter. The teller, a young blonde woman in a sharp navy blazer, offered no greeting, no acknowledgement, no warmth. Instead, she shoved a clipboard at him with the cold efficiency of someone annoyed before he even opened his mouth. "Fill this out." Leonard filled it quickly. It was routine, but her tone wasn't. He slid it back with his ID. She skimmed the amount, $25,000, and immediately pushed the slip back across the counter. "We can't process this." "Why not?" "We don't handle walk-in requests of this size," she replied. "I just watched someone withdraw 40, Leonard said calmly, gesturing toward the front doors. "That's different." "How exactly?" She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes flicked to the glass-walled office behind her. Leonard followed her gaze. A woman stood inside, arms crossed, watching everything. Rachel McAdams, branch manager. Her posture was stiff, her gaze cold. She nodded, barely perceptible, but enough to shift the air. The teller's shoulders straightened, as if armored by permission. "Like I said, sir, we can't process this. You'll need to wait outside while we contact compliance." Leonard's jaw flexed. Just once, then relaxed again. "Look at my ID," he said. "Run the account. I've banked here for over 2 decades." But she didn't move, just tapped her manicured nails on the desk. "Sir, we're just following policy. Please step aside." The word "sir" sounded more like "boy." From the corner of his eye, Leonard saw movement. A security guard, white, tall, built like an ex-Marine, began walking toward the counter. Leonard had seen this dance before. No shouting, no violence. Just a black man being framed as a problem for asking for what's his. The teller didn't flinch. Rachel didn't blink. The guard didn't pause. "Sir," the guard said, "I'll need you to wait outside." Leonard stood still, not resisting, not budging, but that was enough. The guard reached for his arm, not rough, not gentle, firm, controlling. Leonard didn't pull away. But when he was nudged backward, shoulder bumping into the guard's chest, he felt it. The sting, not from the contact, but from the memory of how many times he'd built the table, only to be denied a seat at it. The door opened behind him, glass cool against his back as he was guided outside like a trespasser. His ID tossed. It landed at his feet with a flat, dismissive clack. He didn't pick it up. He just stood there. The Denver morning was crisp, bright, full of motion. But inside Leonard Vance, everything had stopped. A shadow moved beside him. Another guard, black, mid-30s, slim, tired eyes. He bent down, picked up the ID with care. "They always do this," the man muttered, just loud enough. "Doesn't matter if you got degrees, clearance, or clean records. They see skin before credentials." Leonard accepted the ID without a word. "Name's Desmond," the guard added. "They'll remember you now, though." Leonard gave the faintest smile, not because he was pleased, but because Desmond was wrong. They wouldn't remember him. They'd remember what came next. Leonard reached into his jacket, not for a weapon, for a device the size of a card reader, sleek, silver, biometric. He pressed his thumb to the reader. The screen blinked. FIDEX secure. Admin override. He entered a single code, FX9. A small icon turned red. Emergency compliance audit initiated. No shouting, no noise, no cameras. Just a quiet man on the sidewalk, activating a system they never knew he built. And inside? The countdown had already begun. Inside Eastlake Capitol, the hum of business hadn't changed. Phones rang, tellers whispered, printers ticked softly. It was all very normal, at least on the surface. But something had shifted. Desmond, the black security guard still standing just inside the glass door, felt it first. He wasn't sure what had just happened when Leonard Vance touched that silver device, but the air, it got denser, like the temperature dropped without warning, like the whole building suddenly remembered its sins. Back behind the teller counters, Rachel McAdams paced. "Get me Central," she snapped into her headset mic. "Now!" Her voice was tight, calculated. She'd felt in control just minutes ago. She'd done this before. Shut down questionable requests, denied walk-ins, escalated as needed. That's what managers were paid to do. But something about that man bothered her. He hadn't argued. He hadn't begged. He hadn't even flinched when security showed up. He just looked still, controlled, like someone watching the clock. And now her terminal was blinking. So was the assistant manager's. So was every single teller screen on the floor. Alert. Compliance audit requested. Region, Denver. Status, initiated. Rachel frowned. What the hell is this? Amy, the blonde teller who'd served Leonard, leaned closer to her own screen. "I've never seen this before. It's not a fraud flag. It says FIDEX." Rachel stiffened. She knew that name. Everyone in upper finance knew that name. FIDEX wasn't just a compliance watchdog. It was the federal-level ethics protocol that controlled interbank access, a kind of digital gatekeeper tied to the Treasury. But it was rarely used, like an emergency break glass alarm for the entire industry. And someone had just pulled it. Outside, Leonard didn't move. He remained on the sidewalk, phone untouched in his pocket, silver device safely back in its concealed case. Pedestrians passed him by, unaware. One man stopped, recognizing him faintly, maybe from some long-forgotten press briefing. He kept walking. Leonard didn't care. He wasn't there for recognition. He was there to watch a machine break itself. Inside, chaos had begun quietly. No screaming, no alarms, just terminals freezing, transactions hanging, transfer requests bouncing back with vague, unhelpful errors. "System won't let me release funds. Wire transfer just canceled itself. What does pending FIDEX Tier 3 override even mean? My client's standing right here." Rachel's heart pounded. She rushed back into her office and grabbed her personal phone. Her fingers shook slightly as she dialed. "Jeff, this is Rachel. We've got a problem." On the other end of the line, Jeffrey Stone, VP of Risk Management at Eastlake's national office, sighed. I know, we're seeing it too. Every compliance channel in the mountain region just lit up. Rachel tried to sound composed. What's triggering it? Jeff's voice dropped an octave. Denver flagged FX9. She blinked. FX what? FX9, he repeated. Emergency audit code. It overrides all local authority. Locks interbank routing access. Only a federal compliance administrator can activate it. Rachel's mouth went dry. But who the hell can even do that? There was a pause on the line. Then Jeff asked, carefully, you said this started after denying a withdrawal? Her throat tightened. Yes, a man, black, mid-50s, no appointment, requested $25,000 in cash. Name? She opened the log, scrolled, and then she stopped breathing. Leonard Vance. Jeff's voice dropped to a whisper. Jesus Christ! Desmond had stepped away from the door and now stood at the edge of the teller counters. No one was asking him to step back anymore. Everyone was too busy trying to keep the system from collapsing. But Desmond wasn't watching the screens. He was watching Amy and Rachel, and the way both of their postures had changed, from smug to silent. Amy finally whispered, Should we call him back in? Rachel didn't answer. Her lips parted like she might say yes, but her pride fought her jaw. She didn't know how to walk it back. Leonard hadn't yelled, hadn't cursed. He didn't throw a fit or record a video. He simply pressed something. And now they were drowning. Across Denver, other branches of Eastlake began to freeze. Accounts with scheduled wire transfers to hospitals, businesses, payroll providers, all delayed without warning. Investors started calling. A private equity firm in Boulder rang up Eastlake's headquarters demanding to know why a 3.7M transfer was returned. At that exact moment, Treasury systems confirmed that Eastlake's interbank privilege, its ability to send and receive funds across U.S. clearinghouses, was suspended pending emergency ethics review. FIDEX score. Non-compliant cause. Suspected internal profiling pattern. Initiator. Federal Protocol FX9. Manual trigger. It was a systemic indictment, not a personal one. But everyone at Eastlake's Denver branch knew exactly who had pulled the trigger. Back outside, Leonard remained still. He checked his watch. 6 minutes since the denial. Desmond reappeared beside him. They're panicking, he said. I've never seen a screen go that red. Leonard didn't smile, but something in his eyes shifted. They built a system they thought they could control, he said softly. Problem is, they never understood who built it. Desmond paused. Sir, I knew your name sounded familiar. You're the one who wrote the FIDEX charter, aren't you? Leonard didn't answer directly. He just looked up at the glass building in front of him. They just failed their own audit. I'm just the one who told the truth. Inside, Rachel's phone rang again. It wasn't Jeff this time. It was Eastlake's chief ethics officer. Rachel, the voice said coldly. You're to step away from all terminals. An executive team is en route. Effective immediately, your branch is under review. But don't speak. Just listen. You flagged Leonard Vance. You denied a withdrawal from a man who literally built the protocol you just tripped. Do you have any idea what you've done? She didn't, but she was about to. By minute 7, the FIDEX system had pushed alerts to 6 major financial institutions, marking Eastlake as untrusted until further notice. That status automatically triggered 1.8 billion in pending interbank transactions to be paused or canceled across regional networks. 3 board members at Eastlake headquarters began preparing statements. And Leonard? He just turned, nodded once to Desmond, and walked away. Not a word. Not a victory lap, no cameras, no hashtags. Just a quiet man who knew the power of a system he built and how quickly it could turn on those who abused it. By 9:11 a.m., Rachel McAdams wasn't pacing anymore. She was sitting stiffly in her office, headset off, lips pressed tight, watching the screen in front of her refresh with error after error. Her manager dashboard now showed limited access, internal suspension across every function, transfers, authorizations, even staff login permissions. The entire branch was frozen. Amy, the teller who denied Leonard's request, stood quietly at the edge of the doorway. Gone was the smug tilt to her chin. Gone was the certainty in her posture. She looked pale now, lost. "I didn't know," she mumbled. "I didn't know who he was." Rachel didn't answer. She couldn't, because the truth was, she did know. Or at least, she should have. She'd seen his name before, on compliance briefings, on treasury memos, on articles from years ago when Leonard Vance helped launch the federal banking ethics infrastructure. Back then, he'd been called too rigid, too principled, not flexible enough for modern banking. So they'd phased him out. But he didn't disappear. He built something instead, FIDEX, the protocol they were now trapped inside. At Eastlake headquarters, the executive floor was in full crisis mode. Phones rang non-stop. IT logs flashed red, and legal counsel stood huddled in the glass corner office, whispering fast. In the center of it all was Marla Kinsey, the chief ethics officer, standing with arms folded as she stared at a screen showing the source of the emergency flag. Her assistant hovered nearby. "Do you want me to call Mr. Vance directly?" Marla shook her head. "No, you don't call Leonard Vance. You don't correct him. You fix the damn problem before he speaks to the press." "Do you think he will?" Marla's eyes narrowed. "No, that's what makes it worse. He doesn't need the press." She gestured at the numbers flashing across the screen. $1.8 billion paused. 6 banks tangled. The FAA's flight fuel escrow transfers halted. Pension disbursements delayed. "This is bigger than an apology." She turned to her aide. "Get me the Denver branch manager on video. Now." Back at the branch, Rachel's laptop dinged. "Incoming call. Marla Kinsey." Rachel answered, straightened, and tried to steady her voice. "Ma'am." "Rachel," Marla said, tone cool and surgical. "Tell me what happened." Rachel hesitated. "A man, Mr. Vance, came in without an appointment. He requested a $25,000 withdrawal. Amy felt it was unusual, so I authorized a delay until verification. You never scanned his ID." Rachel flinched. You flagged a FIDEX certified account without cause, ignored identity credentials, and then had security escort out the man who literally wrote the FIDEX protocols. Do you realize what that means?" Rachel swallowed hard. "I didn't mean—" "It's not about what you meant," Marla snapped. "It's what you did." A beat passed. Then, "You're done here." Rachel sat still. Marla didn't repeat herself. The call ended. Across the lobby, customers were still present. Some growing uneasy, some already filming. They didn't know all the details, but they knew something was wrong. And now, a black sedan pulled up to the curb outside. The back door opened. Elijah Wells, Eastlake's chief legal officer, stepped out. Dark gray suit, calm fury behind his glasses. He didn't bother to greet anyone as he walked through the front door. He scanned the frozen branch, the frozen faces, the frozen systems. Then he spotted Desmond. "You saw it happen?" Desmond nodded once. "Yes, sir." "Thank you. You're staying?" Desmond blinked. "Sir, you're going to be our witness on record. Now where is he?" "Who?" "Leonard." Desmond glanced outside. "He walked off about 15 minutes ago. Didn't say a word." Elijah smiled grimly. "Of course he didn't." 2 blocks away, Leonard sat on a bench near Civic Center Park. He held a paper cup of black coffee in his hand and watched pigeons bicker over crumbs like Wall Street analysts on a bad earnings call. His phone buzzed. A number from DC. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The system was working. He'd built it for moments exactly like this, not for revenge, for exposure, because the worst kind of rot wasn't loud. It didn't scream or riot. It sat quietly in positions of power, making decisions that shaped perception, deciding who looked suspicious, who needed extra verification, who didn't belong. And today, it had shown its face in public. Back at East Lake, Elijah stood in the center of the branch and made a call of his own. Within minutes, an HR representative appeared on screen and initiated emergency offboarding for Rachel McAdams and Amy. Amy began crying. Rachel stood silent, staring at the floor. Desmond was given a chair and a notepad. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He'd seen enough in his years. But this was different. This wasn't a manager reprimanded behind closed doors. This was public accountability. By 9:29 a.m., internal memos went out to all East Lake branches. Effective immediately, FIDEX protocol compliance training is mandatory for all staff. Branch managers will be audited for discretionary transaction handling. All flagged accounts are under review. 3 high-net-worth clients in Chicago withdrew their accounts. A prominent black business leader in Atlanta tweeted, "You just denied service to the man who helped clean up the 2008 crash. Hope it was worth it." It went viral in under 10 minutes. Leonard didn't look at the internet. He just finished his coffee, stood, and walked. He knew they'd figure out what happened. They'd know he hadn't yelled, hadn't demanded, hadn't made a scene. He'd simply done what they'd refused to do: follow the system, respect the rules, and treat people like they matter. The irony? He didn't need to raise his voice, because when the right man presses the right button, the whole machine speaks for him. By 9:47 a.m., it was no longer just a branch issue. It was an institutional meltdown. The FIDEX protocol, activated quietly less than an hour ago, was now choking the entire East Lake financial network. What began as one man's denied withdrawal had turned into the biggest ethics-triggered financial freeze in the bank's 63-year history. Across the country, screens were blinking red. Routing failed. FIDEX block. Interbank authorization suspended. High-risk score alert. Source equals Denver branch. Payroll departments couldn't release Friday's salaries. Hospitals couldn't transfer vendor payments. Investors couldn't move funds for end-of-quarter positioning. And none of them knew why. Yet, in East Lake's Boston office, a junior analyst checked the error logs and muttered under his breath, "FX9, no way." His manager looked up. "What'd you say?" The analyst turned his monitor. "Denver tripped an FX9 manual override. That code only works if the trigger comes from someone with admin-level compliance authority. Federal tier." His manager's face went pale. "Wait, who initiated it?" Click, click. Scroll. "Leonard Vance." "Oh my God," she whispered. They all knew the name. He wasn't just a former undersecretary of the Treasury. He was the one who created FIDEX, the same protocol they now worked under, the same standard their jobs depended on. And Denver had denied him service at a bank he helped design. By 10:02 a.m., Twitter caught up. A journalist from the Financial Herald posted a single line. "Sources confirm FIDEX triggered audit linked to Leonard Vance." Yes, that Leonard Vance. Developing story. Within minutes, banking Reddit threads exploded. They flagged the Leonard Vance as suspicious? He literally wrote the compliance Bible. This gonna be another Wells Fargo situation? Oh, it's worse. Way worse. By 10:18 a.m., CNN Business sent a push notification. Black former Treasury official and ESG investment chair denied banking service. System-wide freeze follows. The floodgates opened. Leonard didn't watch any of it. He was already back home in Aurora, sitting on his porch with a glass of lemon water and a book in his lap, though he hadn't read a page. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a name he recognized. Senator Lorna Keeley. She wasn't just a political ally. She was one of the few who'd fought with him when he proposed a national banking ethics charter and got laughed out of the room. Leonard let the phone ring. He wasn't ready for politics. Not yet. Meanwhile, Desmond sat in a quiet conference room at the Denver branch, staring at a half-finished HR form and trying to process everything. 3 hours ago, he was just a security guard, underpaid, overlooked, and mostly invisible. Now, he was the only person who hadn't treated Leonard Vance like a nobody. And that mattered. People had noticed. So had corporate. A woman from East Lake's executive team, Michelle Bennett, VP of Talent and Culture, walked in and sat across from him. She didn't look rushed. She looked thoughtful. Desmond, do you know who Leonard Vance is? Desmond nodded slowly. I do now. She smiled faintly. You're the only one who treated him with basic respect. You didn't know his credentials. You didn't know he'd bring down the system, but you treated him like a human being. He said nothing. Michelle leaned forward. We're restructuring. Leadership's going. Entire teams will be reassigned. This incident didn't start with you, but you helped make sure it ended with someone doing the right thing. Desmond blinked. She slid a folder across the table. How would you feel about joining our Ethics and Compliance Division as a regional training officer? He stared at it, then at her. You serious? As a heart attack. By 11:00 a.m., 5 regional bank managers had been suspended. 2 CEOs of Eastlake's affiliate partners had resigned for personal reasons, and a memo from the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency confirmed. All institutions utilizing FIDEX protocol are required to submit a 90-day ethics audit, effective immediately. This wasn't just an internal matter anymore. It was regulatory, and every executive in the banking sector understood exactly what that meant. If Leonard Vance could do this alone, what if he wasn't alone anymore? Back on the porch, Leonard finally opened his laptop. His inbox was flooded. New York Times request for comment. PBS frontline interview invitation. Request from the Treasury Department for closed-door debriefing. But one email stood out. Subject line: From the Office of the President, private briefing request. He stared at it, then closed the laptop. Not yet. This wasn't about him. It never had been. At 12:30 p.m., Eastlake's Board of Directors issued a public statement. We deeply regret the actions taken at our Denver branch this morning and the disrespect shown toward Mr. Leonard Vance. We acknowledge our failure to uphold the values that guide our institution. Effective immediately, we will begin implementing a new internal protocol based on Mr. Vance's original FIDEX standards, including mandatory compliance recalibration, executive-level diversity audits, and public transparency reviews. They didn't even try to defend themselves. Because how do you defend humiliating the man who designed your rules? You don't. You surrender to the reality that he didn't need revenge. He had something far more dangerous, a system that couldn't be silenced. By the time the East Coast markets closed, the real damage wasn't the $1.8 billion in frozen transfers. It was the crisis of confidence. 6 banks that shared digital rails with Eastlake reported system slowdowns and public outcry from clients. 2 publicly traded fintech platforms posted temporary halts in high-value wire transfers due to ethical risk flags. By mid-afternoon, FIDEX had triggered a Tier 2 cascade, a rare escalation that temporarily rerouted interbank transfers through federal clearance, bypassing commercial channels entirely. In plain English, the system no longer trusted the banks to play by the rules, so it took the rules back. At Vanguard Trust headquarters, Leonard's investment group based quietly in Colorado Springs, a special board session had been called, not because Leonard demanded it, because the world did. 12 ESG fund managers dialed in from New York, Zurich, Tokyo, and Johannesburg. They didn't need a press release. They had already seen what happened. One man, one button, one truth exposed, and they were ready to move. Miriam Choi, Vanguard's Global Director of Strategic Impact, was the first to speak. We've been holding back funding for months, she said. Too many banks, too few ethics. Leonard just proved what we've all known. Compliance training doesn't change culture, systems do. Another voice chimed in from London. Let's be real. What Leonard triggered isn't just legal, it's philosophical. It's about who controls fairness in finance. The room went quiet as the screen refreshed with one live number, 12.4B in upcoming ESG funding allocations, pending. Everyone looked to Leonard, seated at the head of the table. He didn't clear his throat, didn't posture, just leaned forward, calm as ever. I didn't build FIDEX to punish banks, he said. I built it to protect people. When it fails, we fail. Then he looked across the digital room. Now it's time to decide what comes after exposure. No one challenged him. The board voted unanimously. Vanguard Trust would withhold all ESG funding from institutions flagged as ethically non-compliant by FIDEX until full public audit. And that was only step one. Meanwhile, in D.C., Senator Lorna Keeley stood before a row of cameras on the Capitol steps. She wasn't there to defend Leonard. He hadn't asked for that. But she was going to say the thing the industry feared. A man was denied access to his own account. Not because of credentials, not because of risk, but because of perception, rooted in race, in assumptions, in institutional habits masked as policy. That man happened to be Leonard Vance. But let's be clear, it could have been anyone. Behind her, aides handed out draft legislation, tentatively titled the Financial Dignity Protection Act. It wasn't just a headline, it was a warning shot. Back in Denver, the East Lake branch had reopened, but the silence inside was thick. No customer wanted to be the first to step in. No teller wanted to be the first to speak. Desmond, now officially appointed as ethics liaison, stood near the front desk with a clipboard and calm presence. People looked at him differently now, not because of power, but because of trust. The new branch manager, flown in from out of state, approached him around 2:30 p.m. "You've got a call waiting in the back," she said softly. Line 2 said it's not urgent, but respectful. Desmond made his way into the office, picked up the phone. "Desmond Carter speaking." The voice on the other end was slow, composed, familiar. "Mr. Carter, this is Leonard Vance." Desmond straightened slightly. "Sir." Leonard didn't speak right away. Then, "You stood still when it mattered. That's harder than it looks." Desmond nodded, even though no one could see. "Thank you, sir." Leonard continued. "I'm forming a review board, real ethics training, real enforcement, not for show. I need people who understand what it means to be silenced, overlooked, or told to wait outside." "You in?" Desmond didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir, I'm in." Leonard paused, then added, "We start next week. You'll get the flight itinerary this evening." Click. No fanfare, just a man building again. By early evening, Eastlake stock had fallen 9.4%. 3 affiliate partners released simultaneous statements confirming they had suspended all joint operations pending review. Major institutional clients began moving assets to banks with higher FIDEX scores. But not everyone was retreating. Some were rising. An online campaign started trending, #follow FIDEX. It wasn't about Leonard personally. It was about a system finally working as intended, defending people instead of institutions. Older users on Facebook commented with stories of being denied loans despite perfect credit. YouTube creators over 60 began recording testimonials. "This isn't about a rich man with connections," one woman from Ohio said. "It's about the message we send when we make good men prove they belong in places they already built." It hit a nerve, especially among those who had lived through similar shame, especially among those who never thought they'd see someone win quietly. That night, Leonard sat alone in his home office. No TV, no news, no scrolling, just silence. He didn't need applause. He didn't even need forgiveness. He needed truth to be heavier than perception. And today, it was. As he closed his notebook and turned off the lamp, his phone buzzed one last time. Text from an unknown number. "Mr. Vance, your one act gave me the courage to report the discrimination at my own branch. Thank you." He stared at it for a moment, then turned off the phone. Let the system do the rest. By 7 o'clock a.m. the next morning, 8 boardrooms across America were in full panic mode. New York, Chicago, Seattle, Charlotte, Atlanta. Banks who'd once dismissed Leonard Vance as too rigid for modern finance were now watching their risk dashboards light up like a Christmas tree, all blinking with the same warning. FIDEX, sector-wide ethics evaluation imminent. The cascade wasn't slowing down. If anything, it was accelerating. 3 major clearinghouses had paused cooperation with low-score FIDEX institutions, which meant millions in daily transactions were being rerouted or rejected outright. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a reckoning. At the Federal Banking Oversight Commission in Washington, D.C., the emergency meeting started without introductions. Inside the conference room sat 11 CEOs, representing over $6.4 trillion in combined institutional assets. They weren't used to being summoned. They were used to summoning others. But today, their eyes were fixed on one empty chair, the one reserved for Leonard Vance. He hadn't confirmed he'd attend. He hadn't returned calls, and that was precisely what terrified them. Not what he said, what he didn't. Across the room, Linda Cho, CEO of Clarion Bank, leaned toward the mic. "We need to be clear. This can't be treated like an isolated PR scandal. FIDEX doesn't just freeze funds, it freezes reputations. If we don't control the narrative now, we lose the public." Greg Mitchell from Sunward Capital scoffed. "Control the narrative? Leonard Vance is the narrative." Heads nodded. Quietly, uncomfortably. Another executive added, "You don't fight someone who owns the protocol you're trying to fix." Linda exhaled. "Then maybe it's time we stop fighting." Back in Colorado Springs, Leonard sat alone in his study. No staff, no team. Just a laptop, a hot cup of tea, and a silent resolve. On the screen was a draft document titled, "The Vance Compliance Framework, Phase 2, Institutional Dignity Metrics." It wasn't about punishing anyone. That was never his intent. It was about redefining how trust is measured, not just in numbers, in behavior, in systems, in people, especially those who never got the benefit of the doubt. He wasn't building revenge. He was building infrastructure. Meanwhile, networks rolled non-stop coverage. CNN Business, Banking in Crisis, One Man's Stand Changes Industry Overnight. MSNBC, From Denied to Defining, Leonard Vance and the Ethics Reboot. Fox, Overreach or Reform, FIDEX Freeze Sparks. Industry Debate. But Leonard had said nothing to the media. No interviews, no social posts, no public appearances. He let the silence speak louder than headlines. And it worked. People paid attention not because he demanded it, but because the system responded to his absence. At East Lake's HQ, a new wave of resignations began. Several regional managers who had ignored bias complaints in the past preemptively stepped down. The board, trying to recover, voted unanimously to implement Leonard's original 14-point dignity standard, which had been shelved years ago for being too slow, too cautious, too academic. Now, it was their lifeline. Desmond Carter, the former security guard turned ethics liaison, sat in on his first executive onboarding session. He wore a simple gray blazer, no tie, no pretense. But the room listened to him, because he'd earned something the rest of them hadn't: moral clarity. He wasn't a consultant. He was proof that the system had been built to ignore voices like his, until someone like Leonard forced it to listen. At 2:17 p.m., Leonard received a personal invitation from the Treasury Secretary. Private meeting, no press, high-level advisory. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he emailed something else. A single PDF attachment sent to 47 executives, 12 regulatory agencies, and the Office of the Comptroller. Subject line: Proposal, the Civil Financial Accord. Inside, a 38-page ethics charter requiring public accountability dashboards, anonymous employee bias reporting channels, mandatory quarterly dignity audits, real-time ethics scores linked to executive bonuses. Adoption would be voluntary at first, but any institution choosing not to sign on would be marked as pending ethics clearance inside the FIDEX system. Translation: public visibility of your refusal. It wasn't coercion, it was transparency with teeth. Some institutions buckled, others postured. But the truth was, no one wanted to be the next East Lake. No one wanted to be the next viral headline. And most of all, no one wanted to be caught ignoring Leonard Vance again. That night, Leonard finally returned one call. It wasn't to a CEO or a senator. It was to a retired postal worker in Georgia, a man named Howard Jennings, who had written to Leonard 6 years earlier after being denied a mortgage despite pristine credit. Leonard had kept the letter all these years. When Howard answered, confused at the unknown number, Leonard spoke first. "Mr. Jennings, you probably don't remember writing to me." The voice on the other end hesitated. Then, "You're the fellow with the ethics system, right?" Leonard smiled. "Still working on it." Howard chuckled. "You made 'em listen?" Leonard paused. "No, sir. I made 'em show what they really think." "Well, that's louder anyway." Across the country, the system didn't collapse, but it bent. It bent toward the people who were always told to stand aside, wait outside, prove themselves again and again. It bent toward dignity. And the man who bent it didn't raise his voice, didn't seek revenge. He just wrote the rules everyone else had to learn the hard way. By 8 a.m. on Monday morning, the world changed. Leonard Vance made it official. No interviews, no podiums, no press. Just a silent upload. A clean white web page with 5 simple words in bold. The Civil Financial Accord, live. Underneath, real-time ethics dashboards. Digital signature protocol for institutions. Audit score transparency by branch. Complaint to resolution time ratios. Whistleblower protection metrics. It wasn't theory anymore. It was live, public, traceable. Every financial institution in America now had 2 choices. Sign the Accord Decline and be flagged as non-compliant, public ethics pending. Within the first 2 hours, 38 regional credit unions and 17 small banks signed on. By noon, one of the top 10 banks in the country quietly joined. They didn't want applause. They wanted cover from the wave that was coming. But not everyone agreed. At 12:46 p.m., Martin Rexford, CEO of Allied Dominion Bank, went on live television. His voice was calm, but his words were sharp. "This overreach from Mr. Vance represents a dangerous precedent. We are a private institution, and we will not hand over operational autonomy to a self-appointed moral committee." Then he smiled at the camera. "We decline to participate in Mr. Vance's accord." It was meant to be a show of force. Instead, it sparked a wildfire. Within minutes, screenshots of Allied Dominion's internal FIDEX score hit Reddit. 3.1 out of 10, 76 unresolved bias complaints, 14 confirmed red flags for customer misidentification. Average wait time for fraud corrections, 22 days. Someone had leaked their report, and no one was surprised by what it showed. Only angry. By 3:15 p.m., #Dropalide was trending on X, formerly Twitter. By 4:02 p.m., 2 Fortune 500 companies pulled payroll services from Allied Dominion. By 5:10 p.m., the NAACP issued a statement condemning their decision. By 7:00 p.m., 5 of Allied's board members had resigned. The lesson was brutal. Refusing transparency in the new world was equivalent to confessing guilt. Leonard watched none of it. He was already 4 steps ahead. At a small roundtable meeting in Chicago, hosted in a local community center, not a skyscraper, he sat with 12 civil rights leaders, ethics professors, financial tech developers, and 2 high school students who had studied FIDEX for a school project. He passed no judgment. He asked only one question. "What would you put in the second version?" The room was quiet at first. Then the answers came. Weighted penalties for repeat violations. Real-time bias tracking by zip code. Bank officers required to undergo racial empathy simulations. Public-facing dashboards everyone can read, not just lawyers. Leonard wrote it all down. Not because he needed approval, because the system needed ownership by the people it was meant to protect. That night, someone leaked a second list online. The refusers list. 19 financial institutions that had actively declined to sign the Civil Financial Accord. Leonard didn't comment. He didn't need to. The list spoke for itself. And people responded. Retirees closed accounts. Community leaders pulled local business funds. Churches canceled long-term lending agreements. It wasn't protest. It was realignment. The system had been passive for so long that people forgot they could move with purpose. Leonard just gave them the tools to see where the poison lived. At Allied Dominion's headquarters, Martin Rexford held a crisis meeting with PR consultants and legal advisors. "This isn't a PR problem," his compliance officer warned. "It's a data problem. They know what we've buried." Rexford was pale, furious. "Then we deny the data." The room was silent. "You want to lie?" someone whispered. "I want to survive." But the damage was done. When truth becomes measurable, denials become confessions. Meanwhile, FIDEX's core dashboard, previously limited to regulators, was open to the public for browsing. Users could now search by bank name, city, branch location, ethics rating, compliance trend over time. Every score was live, color-coded. With a simple definition guide, the people could now see what was once hidden. Grandmothers in Michigan were checking their bank's bias ratios. Veterans in Florida were comparing fraud resolution scores. Teenagers in Oakland were tracking which branches treated people of color fairly. The Accord wasn't just a system. It had become a mirror, and the industry could no longer look away. At 10:42 p.m., Leonard received an anonymous message via encrypted inbox. "They'll come after you next. Be ready." He read it twice, then closed the laptop. He wasn't scared. He was waiting. Because people who built real systems didn't need to scream when they worked. They just needed everyone else to try to catch up. And if they couldn't, they'd be left behind. It didn't take long. 3 days after the launch of the Civil Financial Accord, the counterattack began. But it wasn't loud at first. It was surgical. An op-ed dropped on a mid-tier business site, suggesting FIDEX might be vulnerable to foreign code manipulation. Another article from a finance influencer claimed Leonard had used the Accord to strong-arm small institutions and accused him of having undisclosed personal motives. Within 24 hours, the story spread. Business blogs, YouTube reaction channels, podcast pundits with sleek microphones and empty facts. They all asked the same question, rehearsed from the same whisper. Is Leonard Vance really who we think he is? At first, Leonard didn't respond. He'd spent the last 35 years of his life avoiding the spotlight. The work, not his face, was always the mission. But this was different. This was coordinated. A misinformation campaign built to destabilize trust. And Leonard knew exactly where it came from. Behind closed doors in Manhattan, 5 executives from major institutions had gathered for what they called a risk reduction summit. They weren't wearing name tags. They weren't taking minutes. But they all had one shared goal: stop Leonard Vance before the Accord becomes unstoppable. One of them, a tech investor turned data broker, leaned back in his chair and smirked. No one cares if we're wrong. They care if we sound right before he responds. Another CEO added, "Control the narrative, you control the panic." A third man in an expensive Navy suit murmured, "Make the people fear the system, then the people will beg us to take it back." That was the playbook, and they thought it would work. But they forgot something. They forgot who they were messing with. Not Leonard, but the people he'd built the system for. In Detroit, a retired mechanic named Walter posted a Facebook video. His voice cracked with emotion as he held up a printed screenshot of his bank's FIDEX rating. "They denied me a loan after 30 years of perfect credit. I asked why. They told me to check my profile indicators. Know what those were? Zip code, age, race." He held up a letter, dated 2 years prior. That man, Leonard Vance, didn't just change banking. He gave people like me a place to stand and say, "You can't do this to us anymore." The video went viral overnight. In Atlanta, a teacher named Rosa gathered her students to build a community ethics dashboard using FIDEX public data and published it for their neighborhood to see. They color-coded branches by trustworthiness, helped senior citizens check their own bank ratings, and even set up a hotline to help people switch banks safely. Rosa's words spread across community radio. Leonard Vance doesn't need to defend himself. We're the proof his system works. But the other side wasn't done. They leaked an old financial document, taken out of context. claiming Leonard once partnered with a fund connected to offshore tax shelters. It wasn't true. But truth didn't matter. It made headlines. Until the woman in the leaked document, a respected African economist, posted a video from Nairobi. That fund? It was mine. We built financial access systems in post-conflict zones. Leonard was the only American partner who asked us to publish all our data. Don't twist history to serve your guilt. Another blow. Turned back. And still, Leonard said nothing. He met quietly with civil rights lawyers, economists, and transparency regulators. He didn't fight on cable news. He tightened the system instead. FIDEX rolled out a new feature: source transparency labels. Every article about the Accord would now be publicly analyzed by an AI ethics overlay, tagging known bias, undisclosed sponsorship, contradictory data points, source reliability score. Suddenly, every smear campaign piece came with a bright red flag warning. And the public? They notice. Back in D.C., Senator Lorna Keeley, the same woman who once stood on Capitol Hill for Leonard, called an emergency hearing titled Financial Ethics, Disinformation, and the Right to Know. In her opening remarks, she looked directly into the camera. Let it be known, if you come for the man who created the system that protects us with lies and money, you will answer to the truth and the law. The gallery erupted. Late that night, Leonard received a call from an old friend, Elijah Corman, a black judge who had once been humiliated at an airport before the same kind of power shift began. You know they're going to keep coming, right? Elijah said. Leonard exhaled. Let them. There was a pause. You ever think you'd be the firewall, Leo? Leonard chuckled softly. No, but I damn sure built one strong enough to hold. Across the country, the smears didn't land the way they used to. The people had grown tired of being distracted. They wanted truth with receipts. And Leonard Vance had built a system that gave them both. One call started it, but millions of voices carried it forward. Not with fire, with clarity. By the second week of the Civil Financial Accord going live, the movement had crossed borders. First quietly, through underground forums and encrypted policy newsletters, then publicly on the world stage. At a summit in Geneva, the International Ethics Council hosted an emergency session titled Reforming Financial Institutions Beyond Borders, the Leonard Vance Model. The title said it all. Leonard's name wasn't just being mentioned anymore, it was being proposed. Across from the U.S. delegates sat officials from Canada, Germany, South Korea, Ghana, the UK, Brazil, and Singapore. They weren't arguing about if dignity-driven banking should happen. They were debating how fast they could implement it. A proposal was drafted on the spot. The Global Dignity Compliance Charter, modeled after the Civil Financial Accord, monitored through a multinational real-time ethics network, governed by an independent body led by Leonard Vance. The motion was met with a standing ovation from 8 nations. But Leonard hadn't even said yes. He hadn't even known, yet. Back in the US, Leonard was in no hurry. He wasn't interested in headlines. He was revisiting old FIDEX data from rural banks, looking at complaint patterns in underserved zip codes. He spent most of the day with a small team in a community center in Baltimore, reviewing ideas submitted by students, veterans, and single mothers, people who had experienced dignity violations firsthand. He still answered his own emails, still used a 5-year-old laptop, still refused press requests with a single reply. This isn't about me, but the world was now making it about him. In Brussels, Global Markets Weekly released a report. The Vance Effect, 42 bars in capital reallocated toward ethical financial products in 10 days. In Nairobi, the East African Ethics Exchange announced it would pilot a real-time FIDEX mirror system. In Paris, banking students marched down Rue de Rivoli holding handmade signs. The system works when it works for everyone. We stand with the Accord. Vance taught us transparency is power. The movement was no longer a protest. It was a rebuild. A silent revolution written in spreadsheets, dashboards, and dignity scores. Leonard only heard about his nomination for global leadership when his assistant, Maya, dropped a thick envelope on his desk. "You've been formally nominated to lead the Global Dignity Compliance Council," she said. He didn't even look up. "Tell them I said thank you." She hesitated. "And?" Leonard finally looked at the envelope. "Tell them I also said no." That one word hit global headlines harder than the Accord's launch. CNBC. Leonard Vance declines Global Ethics Council chair, but why? BBC. Vance says no to power, yes to purpose. The Guardian. He's not after the crown. He's after the change. Pundits speculated endlessly. Some said he was too humble. Others called it strategic genius. But those who knew Leonard knew better. He wasn't declining power. He was protecting focus. If he took the title, the mission would become politics. He didn't want applause. He wanted infrastructure that lasted. That night, Leonard sat alone in his kitchen. A tea kettle hissed gently in the background. The news buzzed from the living room, but he wasn't listening. He stared at a notebook, half filled with messy sketches of policy design and community-led enforcement models. He wrote one line at the top of a fresh page. "What happens after I'm gone?" Because real systems didn't depend on a single man. They had to outlive the applause. They had to outlast the headlines. They had to belong to the people. Meanwhile, opposition forces tried to reframe the story. An editorial in the Daily Ledger tried to spin his refusal as dodging responsibility. Another claimed he secretly wants total control, but plays the humility card. But none of it stuck, because Leonard Vance wasn't speaking. And when a man says nothing and still changes nations, every attack feels like desperation. By day 10, 11 more countries asked to join the charter. A new ethics standard, named Vance as an acronym, began surfacing in think tank drafts. Verifiable, accessible, non-discriminatory, community-driven, enforceable. It wasn't his idea, but it was his legacy forming, without permission, without promotion. And that was how he wanted it. In a quiet moment, Leonard took a call from his daughter Ava, a medical student in Oakland. "You really said no to being in charge of the whole world's ethics team?" She laughed. He smiled. "It's not about being in charge. What is it about then?" He looked out the window, the sun softening over the Colorado skyline. "Making sure people like you never have to ask why someone treated them less just because of where they were born, or what they looked like, or where they banked." She paused, then softly said, "You did that." Leonard shook his head slowly. "We did that." It began at 2:03 a.m., a flicker in the data stream. Nothing obvious, just a stutter in the back end of the FIDEX compliance engine, a 0.02-second delay in the fraud flagging script, an anomaly in location mapping for 6 branches in Atlanta, a sudden spike in user feedback metrics, all blank submissions. To most, it would look like a tech hiccup, but to Leonard Vance, it was a message. He didn't panic. He didn't call a meeting. He stood up from his desk, walked to a safe behind a bookshelf, and removed an old, dust-covered USB. On the label, FS Pro T 13.1 AUT ALV created, September 14, 2013. The room was still dark as he plugged it in. The screen flashed. One prompt, activate fail-safe protocol, yes, no. He clicked yes, then waited. 12 years ago, when Leonard first started dreaming of a system like FIDEX, he had one guiding fear. What happens when the people who hate transparency try to control it? So he wrote something no one else knew about. Not his team, not his board, not even his legal counsel. A dead man protocol. One that watched the watchers. It didn't stop attacks, it tracked them. And now, it was live. By 8:13 a.m., a major tech publication reported, FIDEX suffering from unusual API malfunctions. Ethics data may be compromised. Cable news exploded with talking heads declaring, "This is why you don't trust centralized transparency systems." What did we tell you? Vance's code was always too idealistic. Millions of ethics scores now in question. At 9:01 a.m., the stock market dipped. Several major banks used it as an excuse to temporarily suspend ethics disclosures. citing data inconsistencies. By 10:15 a.m., hashtags like #FIDEX fail and #Vance collapse were trending. They thought they had him cornered. They didn't know he was watching them watch him in real time. By noon, Leonard's team had gathered, confused, overwhelmed. "Do we shut it down? Pause the system?" "No," Leonard said calmly. He handed Maya a flash drive. "Go to the clean server room. Load this." "What is it?" His answer was simple. Truth, time-stamped. At exactly 12:47 p.m., the FIDEX public dashboard went dark. Not an error screen, not a crash, a single slide. "System under ethics breach investigation. Stand by." The internet lost its mind. Newsrooms screamed. Bankers exhaled. They thought they'd won. They had no idea what was coming. At 1:33 p.m., the screen changed again. This time it read, "Ethics violation attempt detected. Tracking mode engaged 12 hours ago." A new page opened. IP addresses of intrusion sources. Company servers involved. External payments flagged. Real-time transaction logs showing payouts to 7 data contractors in 3 countries. Access logs traced back to 3 major U.S. banking alliances. Each entry came with timestamps, names, locations, and voice data. Leonard had activated not just a tracker, but a confession machine. Every digital whisper, every code injection, every fake press release seeded into the system, recorded, compiled, and displayed for the world to see. In real time, the screen was live streaming what they had done, in full view of 8.2 million concurrent users. One banker's voice came through, clipped from an encrypted Zoom. "Once we tank the trust score, people will panic. We'll offer them our own dashboard, privatize the ethics system, reclaim narrative. Easy." Another voice. "Don't worry, FIDEX can't track these backdoors. They'll just think it glitched." That's when Leonard's voice appeared, pre-recorded, from 2013. If you're hearing this, you tried to dismantle dignity, but dignity doesn't disappear when you delete a dashboard. It multiplies when you try to hide it. And now, the hiding is over. The live chat exploded. People weren't just watching karma unfold. They were watching history correcting itself. At 2:03 p.m., the SEC launched an emergency investigation. By 2:25 p.m., the DOJ issued subpoenas to the CEOs of the implicated banks. At 3:12 p.m., 4 financial PR firms deleted their posts accusing Leonard of mismanagement. By 4:17 p.m., 3 hedge funds reversed their public criticism and endorsed the accord. By 6:00 p.m., a congressional ethics panel released an official statement. Today's breach was not an accident. It was an attempted coup against truth, against systems that protect the vulnerable. Leonard Vance didn't just survive it. He turned it into an audit trail for the ages. Leonard said nothing. He simply reactivated FIDEX at 6:33 p.m. with one minor change, a small watermark in the bottom right corner of every ethics dashboard. It read, "Tampering is transparency's test. We passed." That night, back at home, Maya knocked on his door. "Do you realize what just happened?" she asked, half laughing, half crying. Leonard looked tired, not broken, just full. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You flipped their whole plan back onto them. In public. With receipts." He shrugged. "I didn't flip it. They exposed themselves." She nodded slowly. "They're calling it the most elegant takedown in financial history." He smiled faintly. "Let's hope it's the last one we ever need." She paused at the door. "And if it's not?" Leonard turned to his computer. "Then the system's ready, and next time, it won't even need me." The chamber was packed, not just with senators and aides, but with people who had never stepped foot inside the U.S. Capitol before. Veterans in faded uniforms, mothers with strollers, retired postal workers, college kids in oversized hoodies. They weren't there to protest. They were there for Leonard Vance. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the gavel came down. The Committee on Financial Transparency and Public Ethics will now come to order. The chairman, Senator Marcus Tillwell, glanced over his glasses with practiced skepticism. They'd prepared for a grilling. They expected Leonard to be defensive. Instead, he sat calmly at the witness table. No lawyer beside him. No notes. Just a pen, a worn leather notebook, and a glass of water. "Mr. Vance," Senator Tillwell began, "you've been called here to explain how a non-governmental platform, your so-called FIDEX, came to influence federal and international financial trust scores." Leonard nodded slowly. "I understand." "And to be clear," Tillwell continued, "we're not here to crown you. We're here to question the reach, the risks, and the real motives behind what some are calling a private ethics monopoly." A few cameras zoomed in. Reporters leaned forward. This was the moment they wanted. Tension. Leonard didn't flinch. Senator Gloria Maynard, a civil rights icon from Georgia, leaned in. "Let me ask plainly, Mr. Vance. Why didn't you ever seek federal oversight for FIDEX?" Leonard's voice was steady. "Because I knew what would happen once the wrong hands found the levers." Murmurs filled the room. He continued, "FIDEX isn't a company. It's a mirror. I didn't build it to dominate. I built it so the people who were always told to be quiet finally had something that listened." The room fell quiet. Even Senator Tillwell blinked. "Well," he said with a forced chuckle, "surely you understand the concern. One system, billions in impact. That's not accountability. That's sovereignty." Leonard leaned forward for the first time. "With respect, Senator, banks have had sovereignty for a century, and look where that left the people who look like me." The silence was now thick. A pin could have dropped on marble. Senator Tillwell cleared his throat. "Well, then perhaps you'd like to clarify. Do you consider yourself more powerful than the Treasury?" Leonard didn't smile. He didn't blink. He simply replied, "I consider myself accountable to the people the Treasury forgot." The gallery erupted. Quiet gasps, suppressed claps. The chairman banged the gavel. "Order! Order in the room!" Another senator, trying to regain control, asked, "Mr. Vance, if FIDEX is so secure, how did it come under attack last week?" Leonard looked at him calmly. "It didn't come under attack. It revealed who was attacking it. And just like that, another punch landed without force. Only truth." Then came the final question, the one that was planned to corner him. A younger senator, newly funded by a major banking pack, adjusted her blazer and said, "Mr. Vance, if Congress were to draft a national ethics standard, would you be willing to license your platform to the federal government?" All heads turned to Leonard. A dozen photographers leaned in. Leonard paused, then said, "Only if the government agrees to be rated too." The entire room froze. Then someone, no one knew who, clapped. Then another. Then half the gallery. Then the entire room stood up. Veterans, students, parents, even some senators. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't applause. It was affirmation. Leonard didn't move. He let the moment breathe. Then added, "I didn't come here to get approval. I came here to say, if we want dignity to matter, then no one gets to be above the mirror." And that was it. No dramatic speech, no slogans, just truth. Later that evening, the clip aired across every major news outlet. Some showed the 12 words again and again. "Only if the government agrees to be rated too." It trended on social media. Teachers printed it and taped it to classroom walls. Banks added it to their internal memos. One news anchor called it the most powerful sentence in a decade of public hearings. Another said, "He didn't testify. He held up a mirror, and Congress blinked." That night, Leonard sat alone in his kitchen. Again, same tea kettle, same stillness. Maya texted him, 12 words. You just rewrote the conversation." He texted back, "I didn't rewrite it. I just stopped them from skipping the most important part." 3 months after the Senate hearing, FIDEX was stronger than ever. 71 banks had joined the accord. 19 countries were piloting their own dignity compliance dashboards. For the first time in financial history, customers had access to real-time ethics scores for both banks and branches. And yet, Leonard Vance wasn't at the helm anymore. The announcement came quietly. No press release, no breaking news. Just a 2-line message on the FIDEX homepage. Effective immediately, Leonard Vance has stepped down from executive oversight. Governance has been transferred to the Dignity Stewardship Council. No one had expected it, but for those who knew Leonard, it made perfect sense. The new governing body wasn't made up of lawyers or CEOs. It included a retired bus driver from Milwaukee, a tribal elder from New Mexico, a high school teacher from Detroit, a refugee advocate from Jordan, a fintech coder from Nairobi, a single mother from Tulsa, and 2 17-year-olds, one from Oakland, one from Seoul. They weren't chosen for their titles. They were chosen for their lived truth. Leonard believed systems rooted in dignity had to be built by those who had been denied it. And now, the mirror no longer belonged to one man. It belonged to all of them. A small group of journalists gathered outside Leonard's home the day after the transfer. He came out in a windbreaker, coffee in hand, no security. "Mr. Vance," one reporter asked breathlessly, "why now? Why walk away when you're being called a hero?" Leonard smiled faintly. "Because if a system can't run without me, then I built a system that serves ego, not people." That was the headline. But what he said next never made it to air. He turned back toward his front door, then paused and said, "This was never about legacy. It was about leaving something that doesn't need a name." And with that, he disappeared into the morning light. Across the world, reactions poured in. The Financial Times called it the most graceful exit in modern corporate history. A student-led protest in Sao Paulo carried signs that read, "Vance walked away, so we could walk in." The newly formed Global Dignity Stewardship Council held its first open forum streamed online. Over 4.3 million people tuned in live. It wasn't fancy. No suits, no podiums. Just people speaking honestly about dignity, access, and accountability. And for the first time, no one asked, "Who's in charge?" Because the answer was finally clear. Everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. That evening, Maya found a handwritten note in her inbox. It was from Leonard. "You were right. The world wasn't ready. But the people were. Keep them at the center and never confuse visibility with value. LV." She sat with it for a long while, then opened a blank document, titled it, "What Comes After Leonard," and started typing. Back at FIDEX HQ, now renamed the Dignity Lab, a mural went up, painted in soft charcoal gray. No portraits, no logos, just 12 words. "Power is not the ability to stay, it's knowing when to leave." And under that, in the smallest print, "Inspired by Leonard Vance, but owned by no one." That was the story of Leonard Vance, a man who didn't shout, didn't threaten, but simply built something no one could silence. What did this story make you feel? Did it remind you of a time you were told to wait outside, or that you didn't belong? Tell us in the comments. We read every one of them. And hey, if you made it this far, tell us where you're watching from. We've seen people tune in from New York, London, Nairobi, and even small towns we'd never heard of. You matter, and your story matters too. This is Telltales, where dignity always finds its voice.